I think it's the moment that we start going. So thank you all for being here. It's good to see a full audience. My name is Ferd Scheepers. I'm the Chief Information Architect and since a few months also Chief Architect ING Tech Group Services. It's cool to be back in Romania. I always love coming here. I've been here many, many times. I have a number of teams working here. I love coming here. I love the food. I love seeing so many people here. That's really good. I was actually wearing a different t-shirt before. I had my open source t-shirt on, but then I saw we have the ING Tech t-shirt. And of course, working for ING for almost 24 years already, I felt I had to put on an ING t-shirt. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about our journey with open source and especially bringing governance to open source. Why is that so important to us? Well, because we are on a journey as a bank to actually be in control of data. And as part of that journey, we have a lot of technologies in place, and more that is becoming an open source world. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we actually think we should be involved as a bank in building our technology, and more as a bank we are becoming an IT company. What does that mean for us? How do we get involved, and what is our role in that? But let's start with a little bit of history. This is one of my favorite pictures. I used it in almost every presentation that I have, because this is a true picture of a single process for a single country at ING. Knowing that we have 50-odd countries and that we have hundreds of processes, and this is a single one of them. Now, if I go to regulators, maybe the European Central Bank, and I show this picture and I say, don't worry, we are in control, nobody is going to believe me. Because actually I don't know whether this picture is reality. I just know that this picture is our documentation. And this is the reality for many organizations out there. Over the course of 30, sometimes 40 years of doing IT, we've built landscapes that look like this, with all kinds of technologies in place, with all kinds of beautiful connections, and all for really good reasons, because those are the systems that keep our organizations running. And next to those direct connections between a lot of systems, over the years we've built data warehouses. I'm sure everybody here knows that every organization has built multiple of them, using all kinds of technologies. And actually it's funny that if you think about that history of how we built the data warehouses, we could have done an amazing job. We could have put it all together, we could have described it, we could have used that opportunity to build a well-governed world. But guess what? Nobody did. We just threw in a lot of data, and more, and each time we had a new use case, we threw in a bit more, and we tried to make sense of it, but we didn't document anything. So reality of today, every organization's got a lot of data, it's all over the place, it's not well governed, and that's a problem. So about 6, and actually now it's close to 7 years ago, at ING we started a journey to become in control of data. And I must say that was an interesting times. Before that time I had hair and it wasn't gray. And now 6, 7 years later I lost most of that, and I feel rather tired sometimes about this journey. But it's been a fun journey. When we started this at ING, this was the time of Agile. So before that we had this great organization with central enterprise architecture. Everything was done according to a certain rhythm. And then Agile entered, and had self-steering teams, and architects, they were actually legacy men. We were the keepers of legacy, as we were taught. And in this world of Agile, everybody could just do what they liked, and because of the craftsmanship of all our people, everything would be well. So when I was talking to our CIO at that point in time, and I was talking about the need for going with a new architecture, if I use the word governance, I would probably be kicked out of the building. Because governance at that time was seen as a 4-letter word. It was not a popular thing to talk about. But if I talked about big data, hey, the sky was the limit, because big data was really cool, and everybody was talking about it. So what we said is, we want to create a big data architecture. Wow, that's a good idea. Let's create a big data architecture. But what we actually did is build an architecture that was ready for governance. but we didn't use the word. So we started looking at the different kind of technologies out there. We started looking at the regulations, and we created a single story that actually makes sense. And that story looks like this. Now, for the people who do work for ING, I think everybody has seen this picture. This is 5 years of my life, this single picture. We drew it. It took me about a year to sell this to the organization. At the beginning, I had no idea how to do that. I learned a lot, making different stories around it, using different analogies about it, explaining it in the sense of, a data lake should be like a library. There's a lot of data, and data is kind of like books. And when you go to a library, the first thing you do is you go to this catalog and you start looking for what kind of book you want to read. And you look for the writer or the theme or the kind of language it's in. Guess what? That's all governance that describes your books or your data. And you want to know that you understand what's in the book. Again, that's governance, that's metadata, that is describing content. We started on this journey many years ago. We created this architecture, we built this architecture, we rolled it out, and now I have this up and running in 13 countries at ING. And one of them is actually a global rollout, so almost all of the data of ING now is going through this architecture. And it's working. We've got most of our data well described. We know where to find the data. And when I go to my regulators now and I say data comes in, it goes through a number of transformations, it goes out on the other side, I have full lineage, I can show you exactly what is done there. The regulators like it. And actually my internal audience really likes it because, hey, it is working, it saves them money. Our business case for rolling this out was pretty much based on making sure that our risk profile as a bank goes down. And by having lineage, I can prove that we're in control of data. The regulators actually believe it, they see it, and they like it. So I get funding to build this and to make this, which is really important. But the real use case we always had in mind is making sure that using this architecture, people can look at data, they can play with data, they can get insights from data. My dream is that our CEO comes in the office in the morning and he says, data, what do I need to know? And he actually gets the insights that is of most interest to him. And actually by talking, by having natural language interrogation of what he is doing. And it's all possible. These days, using natural language processing, using AI, using all these things, I can do that. And that's the stuff that we're building out today. Metadata drives all of this. Metadata is not just saying, this is a field and it's a string. Metadata talks about what is the meaning of the data I'm looking at. Where does it come from? Who's the owner? What can I actually use this data for? Because this is also a really important thing. A lot of the data that we have as a bank, I assume you all have a bank that you do your daily banking business with. You hopefully trust your bank to tell you do the right thing with that data. Not to sell it, not to use it for illegal purposes, to use the ethical thing with that data. For us, that is a really, really important thing about doing our daily business. Some of the things that we get this data for, we can use it for. If, for example, let's say you travel in a different country, and I know using, geolocation that you are traveling in the US, and all of a sudden your bank card is used in, Australia. That's an interesting thing. I don't think you would mind me using that correlation and calling you and saying, hey, what's going on? You're in the US, your card is being used in Australia. Should I block it? Right? Nobody would object. If I actually use that information that you're traveling for sending you an ad about, which hotel you need to go to, are you happy with that? Maybe you are, and then I ask you for that and you give me consent, then all is good. But if not, I'm not going to do it. So knowing what the data is, what I can do with it, where it comes from, the location of it, all these things are really, really important. We are in this technology at a new phase. So in the past, and actually most things that we've built were still rather traditional. Our current data lake is still rather batch-driven. It's end-of-day processing. We're a bank. These kinds of things are really important. But we're at the verge of everything becoming real-time. And actually, it's great. I mean, I can do things faster. I can use new technologies. I have a lot of engineers that love that stuff. But when I look at this landscape, it is not well organized. It is great from a technology perspective. Really, what things can do, it's amazing. I just visited Alibaba not too long ago. They have just bought a German company called Data Artisans, who are behind Apache Flink. And they do 1.3 billion transactions per second to this technology in sub-100 millisecond response times. As a technologist, I'm like, wow, that's really cool. When I look how they do it, it's amazing. When I look what kind of governance they have on this, nothing. But they're a Chinese company, they're not a bank. They have different standards than we do. So when I look at this world that we're in, it's all kinds of great new technologies out there. So anybody can mention all the technologies on there? No? So this like every week, maybe even more, there is a new technology out there in this space. And they're all about streaming technology. They're all about real-time analysis. They're all about AI on real-time data. And on the other hand, I have the regulators. I have the European Central Bank. I have all the SOX compliance I need to adhere to. I have GDPR that tells me I need to do the right thing with data and ask my customers what I can do with data. I have a lot of these regulations coming at me. And I'm pretty much in the middle thinking, what do I need to do? Actually, I was just saying before, you might think this is just a picture. This is actually literally me in a lion suit. No joke. You recognize me? No? It is God's own truth. I used this suit one time to walk through ING. I put on the suit. I was going around, and people were coming up to hug me. It was really fun. So I have a few pictures of that. But it is kind of like the look on my face when I think about this. Like on the one side, I need to be in control. I need to do everything right. On the other side, like every single week, somebody comes to me and said, I have this really cool technology. Can I use it? And I really don't want to say no. I really want to say, yeah, great, let's do it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we think we can make this possible. I presented about a year and a half, 2 years ago on a Confluence Kafka summit in New York. And there was the CTO of Confluent, Nia Naghidi, really smart lady, built a lot of the Kafka stuff that I think most of you know and hopefully love. And she was saying, ETL is dead. Long live streams. Great statements. So I have a slightly different opinion. I think ETL is great, and it's really cool that it's there, and it should be there, and we should start using it. But it needs to get out of puberty. It needs to become mature before we can use it for everything. What we have today with ETL, what we use, is there for a reason. It is there because it works. It is governed. I can use it. I can show the lineage. I can show all these things. And with streams, I can't do that yet. So we need to put some work on that. So what it ends up with is that, being in the middle, I have to become a little bit of a sheriff and kind of like say, you can't do this, this is not allowed, and I don't want to be a sheriff. Well, I want to be a sheriff, but I want to be this kind of like really nice sheriff, that helps people, and that, helps old ladies cross the street, and is nice to little girls. That's the kind of sheriff I want to be, not the one with guns and shooting people and threatening them. You can't do this, you can't do that. So how do I do that? I really want governance to become easy and cool. Now, those are not the first 4-letter words you associate with governance. I understand that. But it is the objective of what we try to do. We want to make it easy for people to use governance. We want to make it easy for people to actually understand that governance is important and to use it. And I think we made some progress there. So I want to show you a video of how we actually sold that internally at ING. Let's see.
With customers spending ever more of their lives on social media and other online experiences, they no longer want to commit extended time to banking or interact with a bank like ING as a separate digital destination. Instead, they want our services to be seamlessly integrated into everything around them, then made available in personal, individual, and relevant ways only when they need them, so they can make the right decisions and take the right actions even more quickly and efficiently. To achieve this, we need to be present in the various channels our customers use, be able to identify their behavior in each one of them, and understand and satisfy their needs as part of our ongoing dialogue. For that reason, we need to evolve from our traditional closed operating model to a new, open way of doing business, developing a touchpoint platform that becomes the center of a multi-supplier ecosystem. The secret to this transformation is APIs. At its simplest, an API is a two-way connection that allows data to flow securely from one entity to another. At ING, APIs will allow us to more efficiently connect to each other internally, combine services faster and in new innovative ways, and deliver a more seamless customer experience. But to get the most from these APIs and make them truly global, we have to build them all using a common language. So, going forward, our APIs, which are managed in the API suite of Touchpoint platform, will all be written in our existing global language, ING Esperanto. This means that every building block can be shared globally, as can any API built from the constituent parts, massively increasing reusability and speed of development. For consumers, once they know how to integrate one ING API into their customer journeys, they can easily connect any other, allowing them to quickly scale up and evolve their businesses. Having consistent APIs based on data which is well-defined and well-described will enable all parties to easily add their APIs to our platform, ensuring it has the maximum flexibility, interoperability, and delivers the greatest value. By establishing ING Esperanto-based APIs, we will be able to implement global data management's uniform data governance process across APIs, and therefore be able to control, measure, and report on the data that flows through them, and the highly dynamic platform they're part of, ensuring we can satisfy any regulatory requirements around data, such as GDPR, and more efficiently evolve our own business so that we can continue to keep our customers a step ahead.
So this is kind of like our internal video to sell the story. It's really funny. If you listen to the guy actually speak, he has like 3 sentences in the whole video. He's like, and. It's really interesting. Each time I see it's like, come to the end of a sentence and go to the next one, but it's only a few. Of course, there's a lot of bullshit bingo in there. I mean, it uses all the nice verbs and it's all the great communication things. But it's really important. You need to sell this story. You need to actually have a way to explain the story also to people that are not very technical and make sure that they understand what we're doing. So we actually build a way to make governance simple for our developers. And how do we do that? Well, we actually build a lot of plumbing around it that make it very simple for people to consume what we've done. So we have our ING Esperanto. It's a set of business terms, so we really describe what it means to be a customer, what a product means, all these things. We have that in a nice catalog, and that's actually what we want everybody to use. But if I go to the average developer and I say, hey, you know, you need to use these terms, they go like, I know much better. I can know how it feels to build a customer API. I know this. This is easy. That's what I do every day. And they all do it different. And then we have to do rework, and it's a lot of work. But if you make it easy for them to actually consume what's there, all of a sudden, they don't want to do it themselves. So what we did is actually we used the OpenIP API editor. I think many of you, if you develop APIs, you use this. Using the previous name was the Swagger editor. And we actually extended it. And we made it possible for API developers to take our existing definitions, just drag it in, and they have a perfect API definition according to ING specs. No rework, not need to think about, what is the length of a street name in a customer address. All these things come out of the box. And it's really easy. They just have to look it up. They can type things like customer address. They will find it, they drag it in, and they've got a perfect definition. And actually, when you put something, in production, we test the score. So here on the top, you can see that actually we tell you how compliant you are to the ING Esperanto. Again, have a small video to show you how we actually do this and how this works, just to demonstrate that it's really easy to use. Let me see if I can get this running.
In ING, we define our APIs according to the OpenAPI specification. It comes with open source tooling like the OpenAPI editor, or as it was previously known, the Swagger editor. In this screencast, I'll show you how we use it as part of our API platform, and I'll highlight the use of the ING-wide data model, which we call Esperanto. Now let's look at an example of an API specification. I'm going to open one. It is simplified for demo purposes. In the console on the left, the black screen, you can edit your API specification. And on the right, you see a nicely rendered version of it. This example is about a deposit agreement. Its specification contains everything you need to know to use this API. For example, it contains a description and contact details. There are two endpoints defined. There is a GET endpoint to retrieve your existing deposit agreement, and there is a POST endpoint to request a new one. The editor has several functions to aid you in your API design. If you make a mistake, for example a typo, the editor gives you a warning. Details are available in the preview pane, so you can easily correct your mistake. Snippets facilitate easy editing. For example, if you want to add a put endpoint, you can use the put snippet from the context-sensitive menu. Let's take a look at how data is defined in an API. First, I'm going to show data definitions in the specification of a single API. It has drawbacks, that's why I've labeled this method the old way. To actually retrieve your deposit agreement, you have to define what a deposit agreement actually is. Basically, you have to define its schema. Now you can do that in your API specification directly. That is what I'm actually doing right now. I am defining that the schema consists of an account number, an amount, and an interest rate. In the graphical view on the right, you can see the endpoint definition, including the schema I've just created. The problem with this approach is consistency. An enterprise has dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of APIs. Maybe not in the open, but certainly within the organization. If they all carry their own flavor of the data model, it is impossible to have consistent data definitions across all of these APIs. Now for the solution, which is the new way of working. Data models will not be defined in each individual API, but instead we're going to refer to the ING Esperanto data models. Esperanto consists of ratified business terms, a logical structure, and a physical representation. For APIs, JSON schemas are generated from these models. We've added a pane with the library of Esperanto schemas. You can browse through them, or use the search functionality to find the one you're looking for. You can look at the schema, view its description from a business perspective, and with the model view, you can easily view its properties. So for example, here is the account number. The schemas are actually JSON schemas, so of course there is a JSON view as well. So if you have found one you're looking for, you can easily drag and drop it to your API specification, and that's it. You have defined your API using ING's global data model. In doing so, you've ensured that your API is consistent with all others and can be understood by all consumers.
So we built this and we're using it. And we actually now have, I think, more than 500 different API definitions generated. We don't construct it by hand. They're all generated from our Esperanto model. And actually now for the first time, I have developers asking me for more governance, which is pretty unusual. They really ask me now, can you also go in this domain? Can you generate it there? We have to do a lot of work there. Can you do it up front? So we just have to drag it in. So this is now used extensively by the developers at ING. And there's a lot of need for this now in the organization because everybody feels this is an easy way to do it. You just go there, you type what you need to have, you drag it in, and you can do the real work that you want to do as a developer, which is build the logic behind the API and not focus on what is the right data model, all these things. So it actually works. It is something that is accepted and that is actually embraced now. This is part of what we're doing, but there's actually one bigger initiative that we're also working on. This is open metadata. And actually this is bigger than only being able to do governance on open source. It actually started with us wanting to have a broader set of governance over different technologies. So about 3 years ago, we started on this because we saw that we have a lot of technologies, open source, but also products in the bank, and we want to be able to use all of them. We want to use best of breed solutions in the bank, not just a single technology stack. And for that, we need to have something to do governance across all of them. So we started with a journey with Hortonworks and IBM at that point in time to build a solution that would actually work across all technologies based on open source. So we started in Apache Atlas, which was a really nice available open source metadata repository that we could extend and that we can build stuff on top of to make it possible to govern not just the existing solutions, but also new technologies, but also bridge that gap to what is already there. And the whole idea about doing this is that we want to use metadata for everything. We truly believe that by having a consistent metadata layer, everything will become much easier, and it's the only way to have governance across the bank. So metadata should be part of every solution. It should be driving everything. It should be driving the access. It should be driving where you can find data, knowing where the data is. My views to my regulators. All these things come through metadata. So what do? We took actually an example of something that everybody recognizes. So I'm sure everybody here uses their camera to make pictures, right? You have your phone, you make camera, you make a picture. Most of you have never maybe realized that with that data comes a lot of metadata. So when you make a picture and you actually look at that picture and you go view what's in there, it's not just the bits and the bytes that represent the pixels. It tells you where this picture was taken, what day, location, hour of the day, what the lighting was. If you have a digital camera with a lot of settings, it tells you what the diaphragm was. It tells you all these things. And when you take that picture and you take it from a single device and you bring it to anything else, the metadata goes with it. And every software that you will use on every different technology understands that metadata. And it's actually the same thing when you have an MP3. You take an MP3, it will tell you who wrote the song, who sings the song, what comes from which year, all these things, and it's understood by every technology. And we use that without thinking. It's so natural. But when it comes to data, we don't do that. We have data, and we don't govern the metadata around it. And that is exactly what we want to solve. We want to come to a situation that is natural, that when you have data, the metadata always follows the data. Wherever you look at this data, you understand what you're looking at. That is the purpose of what we're going to build, or what mostly we have built already. So what do? We extended Apache Atlas to include a federated open metadata landscape that makes it possible to actually connect multiple metadata repositories on the level of exchanging metadata. So you would have, say, Apache Atlas itself that has a lot of metadata around everything that's in a Hadoop space. You would have maybe a IBM repository that governs all the metadata in there. You would have one from SAS in this case, and you would build a layer on top that makes it possible to exchange metadata between them. And on top of that, you would create a set of endpoints that make it possible for the different users of metadata to consume it. What would different users be? Well, for example, if I'm a BI user, I'm interested in looking at, what kind of data is there, and what is the quality of that data, and maybe where does it come from. If I'm a CDO and I'm doing governance, I'm interested in describing what something is. I'm interested in making sure that if new data exists in the organization, and if it's not governed, I put it under governance. If I'm a developer, I'm interested in finding these kind of like JSON snippets to put into my API editor. So I have different use for metadata, and that's why I have different APIs on top to actually consume it. So what we've done is actually we've standardized metadata across the board. We've come up with a consistent set of definitions for metadata, APIs around them, and events to share them. And we've made this all in open source. And on top of that, we've come with a set of, as we call them, frameworks that really are about how you use this for governance, how you use this to actually look at data and from there generate the metadata. Because one of the things that we have in mind is automation. You want this to be easy. You want to be this easy to use. You don't want to do a lot of manual work because that is exactly the problem most people have with governance. It is associated with red tape and manual work. A lot of this has now been built. So over the last year and a half, we've been building this, and in between we actually moved this whole open metadata landscape out of Apache Atlas, and we moved it into the Linux Foundation. Mostly because of politics, so I'll not bother you too much with that. But there were a few companies that were interested in joining us if we pulled it out of Apache Atlas because they saw Hortonworks as a competitor. And actually Hortonworks was also happy for us to pull it out because that means they could concentrate on building their Atlas and we could build the rest of it. But it's still very well integrated. We've got Atlas connected, we've got IBM connected. We're now very much working on having SAS connected, which is going to be probably in April. We've built a connection with Microsoft also, which is still in POC phase, I would say. It's not yet officially part of the Microsoft stack. And we've built a lot of these catalogs on top. So we've already shown within ING that if we have our metadata governed in Atlas and in IBM IGC, we can see the metadata in Power BI. We can see it in the SAS technology. We can see it in many of our open source technologies. This is all already working. Not yet fully in production. We're still having to do some work there, but a lot of this stuff has been built. And what we're also doing is when new initiative starts within ING that actually want to do this, we make it possible for them now to choose the technology that they want. So for example, within one of our departments, they are really enamored by Kylo. They love it. Great, so build your integration between Kylo and open metadata. You can do it in a number of ways. They actually made the choice to go through Apache Atlas. So they're connecting Kylo to the Atlas metadata repository. And doing so, they can actually fully integrate in this open metadata landscape. And we have full governance on everything they build. Another group within ING, they love Python. They want to build everything in Python. And actually, we allow them to do that by saying, hey, if you just tell us exactly what you've built and you go through one of the API sets that we've called the data platform, you can actually bring everything in there and we know exactly what you've been doing. So they're now building this and they're using Python to do a lot of the stuff that we traditionally used to do with DataStage or a lot of technologies that we bought. That's great. We're talking to Cloudera. Can we actually integrate their Navigator product also in this as a full new metadata repository? So actually there's 3 different ways to bring in new technologies and all of them we support. Result of this is that where in the past we had to say, we stick with a single vendor and that's it and this is our landscape, we now allow much more open source integration. We allow a lot of these things to happen. I currently have more than 10 people, half of which sit here in Romania, building this out. So they do everything, and I mean everything, in open source. We built this out, we give this to the community, we built this out together with now 5 different companies out there. We're still looking for more to join. And this is part of the Linux Foundation. We've become part of the Linux Foundation as an official member. We truly, as a company, believe that this should be open source. We don't want to have this proprietary to ING, but there's no benefit for us. We love to, donate it to the open source community, become part of that, and it's really cool to build this. Because you do it together with a lot of other companies. There's a lot of enthusiasm in building these things. We're part of this Linux Foundation. We go to Linux conferences and tell this story. I think also for the people, I look at Maria, that work on that, people love to work on that, right? Everything, like I said, we do is in the open, and everything is part of the ODPI website. So everything we've done, like each time we have a meeting, the notes are on there, every line of code is in there, the build environment is there. If you're interested in this, you can copy it, you can take it, you can join us, you can be part of it. It's a lot of fun to build these things out. We truly believe in this. And we believe that it's really important to use open source technologies. And I think this is now also a market understanding. I think maybe even 3-4 years ago, when you heard a company like IBM say, we like open source, it actually meant we'll take it, we'll rape it, and then we sell it to you. That was reality. That's no longer the case. I can actually say that a lot of these bigger companies, they're embracing open source because they see the benefits. They're still building stuff on top of it, and they still want to sell that to you because, hey, they have to make money. So I don't blame them for that. But you do see that companies are taking open source very serious. And they're also seeing that there is a market in bringing things like governance to open source. There is a market in taking these technologies on and making them part of your ecosystem and supporting them. I was how long is that now ago? 3-4 weeks ago, I was in San Francisco in an IBM conference, and you see Jeannie Rometty, who is the CEO of IBM. IBM has 400,000 people, and she literally says on stage, if we think of something new, our first mindset is, can we bring this to open source? That is really different than what I heard a few years ago. When we talked to IBM, I think 6 years ago, about Hadoop, they took a Hadoop stack, they completely encapsulated it with their own stuff, and they wanted to sell it to you. They stopped doing that. They just used Hortonworks and Cloudera now. They don't even think about building it themselves. So the whole mindset about open source has dramatically shifted. We now see that it's finally time to also bring governance and these things to open source, and where it's not happening, we actually feel that we can be part of this because that's what open source allows us to do. We can step in, we can become part of it, and we can drive this to where it needs to be. And it's really, really necessary because the developments in open source go so fast, no big company can keep up with that. The best ideas come from open source. We desperately need to embrace those ideas because we need to have that speed and agility to actually serve our customers better. But we need the governance in there, and it's the opportunity for us to actually do it. So saying that, I know it's before lunch. I didn't want to make this too long because I know you're all hungry. But I'm more than happy to answer any questions or discuss any ideas or thoughts that you have, or if you think I'm really insane, this is the moment to tell me. So there's two things that we have in mind. So ideally, we're looking for a lot of formats where you can actually bring data and metadata together. There's a few formats that actually allow you to do that. So if you look at, for example, Parquet, you can actually bring the metadata with the data. If you look at the Avro schemas or actually even API schemas in JSON, you can do these things. So at some point, you can actually bring the data and the metadata together because the format allows you to do so. If you look at the database, there's a limited amount of things that you can do in the database, right? I mean, it has some metadata because a table name and all these things, that's also metadata, but much more than that you can't do. So what you actually need to do is sometimes bring something like a metadata repository to glue on top of that, but you make sure that that metadata repository is connected to the rest of the world, so the moment your data moves to something else, the metadata has to go with it. And that's one of the things that we now pretty much have worked out, at least for our landscape. So where we start with creating data in a system of records, we immediately describe that. And when we bring that data along, because of the lineage, we know where the data is going, and the metadata goes with that. So when I now go to my reporting environments towards the regulators, I can actually literally click on a field and say, tell me where this comes from. And it will show me up into all the systems of records where the data comes from. And I will tell me what it is. And it will tell me exactly what it is. Tell me where that data comes from and what that data was. And it will tell me all these things in one view. So it's not yet perfect. I'd like to have something like a JPEG format or an MPEG format which actually kind of like glues it in there. But that is not some format that now completely exists across all these environments. So we make do with what we have. I don't per se want to have it in one place. I want to have it accessible from one place. And yes, I definitely want to do data mining on it. And I definitely want to give the metadata also to my data scientist to look at it. And metadata, I mean, the name says it, metadata is data. I mean, we treat it also as data. It is available for your data scientist to play with. But what it also does, it also makes sure that because we set governance through the metadata, we also can make sure that they don't do everything they shouldn't do. Right? So let's say I have my data scientist and they look at data. I don't want them to look at your credit card number. Why would they need your credit card number? I want to look at a masked version of that or maybe a generated version so that they know what they're looking at. They can still do the right thing, but they can't just like write it down and then go at home at Amazon and order something. So it's very important for us as a bank to make sure that we can actually not just prove that we're doing the right thing, because that's kind of like from the negative side, that we have to prove we're doing the right thing. We actually want to do the right thing. So for us, data ethics is a really, really important topic. You don't use the data for things that you're not supposed to use the data for, even though the law might allow you to do it. You don't do business with us for us to use your data to sell it to somebody. Even maybe we're allowed to do it, it's just not the thing you do as a bank. And if I believe that we were doing that, I would leave the company. Because as a private person, I'm really worried about what happens with my data. I'm a person who puts nothing on Facebook because I know what happens. Or on any site, by the way. No, we have not. We have actually tried as much as possible to use existing industry formats out there. But there is very limited industry formats around metadata that are not associated with a technology implementation. And that's a bit of a risk. But what we have is pretty much as simple as we could make it. So our data types, etc., are very simple. And they are very close to what MITI, I don't know if you know MITI. MITI is an organization that has pretty much come up with a bridging standard between metadata solutions, and they have done this based on a model that came from the academic world. And we've, as much as possible, stuck to that academic model because it's, again, open source model and it's freely available. So there is no company that can say, it's my model, so I embrace it. Yes, so is there a one-to-one relationship? No, because it's actually a really, really complex relationship. If you look at the model of how you could structure data and put a metadata model on that, that would involve a PhD by itself to actually, work that out. I mean, we've been trying to do some work around it, and you can make it like hugely complex. What we try to do is that the moment we actually have a data set somewhere available in a physical, accessible location, we try to bring the metadata to that data as much as possible. But it's actually derived from us understanding where the data comes from. So I'll give you an example. Let's say I use an address. Address is very nice. I go outside and I look at the street name and I look at a house number and I have an address. Right? It's an address. Street name, house number. I can look up probably on my phone what the postal code is, and I have a full address. And when I tell you this is an address, you say, yeah, that's true. And I say, very public information, right? Can look outside, street name, house number, address, as public as can be. Now, if I tell you this is the address of an ING customer, all of a sudden this becomes confidential information. It's the same address. But in the context of looking at it, it becomes something totally different. So when I have a table that just says name of the street, house number, postal code, just by having this table, I don't know whether this is open information that I can give to anybody or it's very confidential information that I can give to nobody. I need to understand where this data comes from. Does this data come from my customer administration? Hey, if it comes from there, it is about ING customers, making it confidential information. Does this table come from, I don't know, the telephone book? It is public information. So understanding what your data is and that metadata, it traces back to the origin of that data. It traces back to all the transformations. I mean, it may have come from a phone book, but I somewhere in between did a query that joined it with my customer table. It becomes confidential again. So where you expose your data, you need to go fully back to where that data comes from, with all the transformations to be able to say for this set of data, this is the metadata it shows you with it. And that's the complexity that's way bigger than, say, for pictures, because you don't do so many transformations that actually join pictures and do complex things. Does that make sense? Exactly. Well, that's because when we actually expose this data, we derive the metadata based on the whole flow. So everything we have around data is governed. So when you expose a data set in our governed landscape, we, per definition, take that everything with us and put that metadata to it. So when you look at it, we know. Yes. Exactly. Which is non-trivial, I'll tell you that. It's not entirely based on open source, no. So our current landscape is a mix. We have, when we started with building this data lake, in all honesty, we started with 100% closed source technology. Why is that? Because it was the only thing that I could buy from the market that came with lineage. And my selling point, even at that point in time, was, guys, looking at the regulations that are coming, we need to have this. That took me a year to explain, maybe because I'm not very good at explaining. But now everybody is like, oh, I'm so happy we have lineage. I was saying years ago we need lineage. And it's like, I don't recall you saying that 5 years ago, but good, we have it. So, you know, success has many fathers. Now finally we're in a place that we can start introducing open source technologies because we've built a lot of these things. And maybe even before I could have spot solutions with open source that had a form of lineage, but I could not bring it together. We're finally now at the stage that I can have multiple technologies working together. I can stitch this lineage together, and all of a sudden I can show that picture to the regulators, and they say, yeah, can you prove this is reality? I say, follow me, we go to the screen. It's not a picture, it's reality. It comes from my systems. So our majority today is still closed source. Ask me in a few more years, and I think the landscape will be fundamentally different. Nobody? In that case, thank you very much for your attention, and have a good lunch.